Obscuria!
Welcome back, my friends, to the In Obscuria podcast, a podcast where we discuss obscure rock and punk and metal, and we put them in one of three categories: the lost, the forgotten, or the should-have-beens. If you're new to In Obscuria, what we do is every week we exhume and dissect from my personal collection an artist, an album, or songs from the spectrum of rock, punk, and metal. And my name is Kevin Williams, and I'm joined by Mr. Robert Harrison. What's going on?
Not much. I'm doing really well. I just had chips and queso for dinner.
And you got your beer, so you're ready to go.
And we're sponsored tonight by the Champagne of Beers, Miller High Life. So living my best life by having chips and queso for dinner.
Only the best for you.
There's nobody else telling me it's a bad idea. This is why married people live longer, because there's usually somebody else in the house saying, you know what, that's a bad idea.
You still end up doing it. So before we get going, I want to mention a couple of the podcasts that I listen to that got me into this, and they're podcasts that I hope you will check out as well. So please check out Metal Up Your Podcast, The Dummy Room, Pod of Thunder, Decibel Geek, Podcast Rock City, Cobras and Fire, Growing Up Rock, The Lipstick Panel, and History Science Theater. Check all those out, and plus many more that I usually call out as well, but, tonight...
That's it.
That's all I'm going for.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. We're going to get to the point tonight. Remember that we are at inobscuria.com. Go check it out. Our episodes are up there, and we're on all the socials, so like us, share us, recommend us, communicate with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, in Obscuria.
We love to hear from you. Give us a shout. Tell us if we're sucking horribly this week or just slightly less than usual.
Exactly. And we got a tweet from Jeff Taylor, who he comments almost every week. So thank you, Jeff, for commenting. So last week we were discussing, or actually 2 weeks ago, I guess I should say, we were discussing the new wave of British heavy metal. Nawabum. And we talked about a band called A to Z. And we were saying, why did this band only last one album? Because the guitarist was so good. We were talking about how great he was. And I said, if anybody knows anything about him, let us know. And so Jeff let us know, and he sent an article to us, and the guy's name was Gary Owens. And he says he was wrongly accused of murder, and it ruined his life and career. And then he sent me a link to the story that has the whole story. I've gotten through about half of it. It's a very long story that the guy wrote. So,
wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, you don't hear that every day, that somebody got accused of murdering someone.
And I guess that's why... A to Z is not a household name.
I'd be pretty unhappy if I got wrongly accused. I don't know if that would ruin my career and my life, but it would suck.
If you were wrongly accused and it took everything you had, every resource you had to prove your name and to prove that you were wrongly accused, then it would ruin your life.
I'd sell the band van.
That's all you would focus on.
I would sell the band van to finance my attorneys. That's how important it would be.
Not.
Maybe. Okay, I'd sell the fire truck first, then the band van.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Jeff, for that. And thanks for always sending notes to us and let us know what you think of the episodes. Folks out there listening, do the same thing. We have a lot of listeners, I noticed, in Australia now.
Really?
So thank you guys in Australia for listening to us. Hopefully we didn't say anything to offend you in our last episode. We talked about Japan, so probably not.
No, we said...
Same area of the earth.
In the southern hemisphere. Odd folks down there.
So usually what I do, right, is I conduct a seance, or I get my Ouija board out, or I go to my magic 8-ball. This week I did not do that. I just didn't have time. So instead, I was watching The Return of the Living Dead the other night when everybody went to bed, and I thought, well, I'm going to watch a horror movie since nobody else will watch with me. And as I was watching, it's one of my favorite horror movies because it's campy, it's fun. It came out in 1985, and I was looking at the cover, and I was thinking, the cover depicts these punk rock looking zombies, and they're spray painting a tombstone with Return of the Living Dead spray painted on it. And I'm thinking, if they were dead punks, they would have had to been pretty old in 1985 because there are punks in the movie. So I'm thinking, that kind of gave me an idea. And so I thought, well, what punks would be dead in 1985? Well, it would be wherever the punk rock movement came from. So I thought we could talk today about ProtoPunk and the first wave of punk rock. So only stuff from the 70s, and really up to the year zero, which is considered the year zero is 1976. That's when the Ramones
That's the
kind of founded
That's the beginning.
punk rock, yeah, and the Pistols. So I thought we'd discuss that today.
I love it.
All right, let's do it. Needless to say, we might get a few more cuts in today because the songs were only going to be a minute or two long.
Short attention span theater, just like it was written for me.
Exactly. So if you start to think about where punk rock came from, I mean, it didn't just spring up. You know, it actually came as early as the 50s. If you think about the original 50s rock and roll, that's the basis for a lot of punk rock. Bands in the 60s that were a little left of center, and then all the way through the 70s, there were bands that were kind of leading the way to punk rock. And a lot of people, because of the way that when punks came about in year zero and after, it was kind of like there was no music before that, but they were influenced by stuff. It was just the way they marketed that whole thing.
They tried their best to hide the influences, but
they were trying to be, we're originals, screw the system, we're new, this hasn't ever been done before, and we know that's not true. Mm-hmm. So I thought we could kind of go back and talk about where they came from and listen to some groups that maybe influenced the whole movement. And the term punk rock was actually used by American rock critics in the early 70s to describe mostly 60s garage bands. And I don't know if you've ever listened to Little Steven, his radio show.
Underground Garage?
Yeah. So that's basically
garage rock.
That's garage rock. The Kingsmen in 1963 with Louie Louie. That's garage rock. And there were a bunch of those bands in the 60s. And then you had bands that were just either garage oriented and they were kind of psychedelic, like the 13th Floor Elevators. You ever heard them?
Yeah.
It was an Austin band. They actually had a guy that played a jug, an electric jug.
Electric jug.
You should go check out 13th Floor Elevators. I'm not playing them today, but they're pretty cool. But their guitarist and singer was named Rocky Erickson, and he's kind of like a godfather of punk kind of guy. And then there were bands from the West Coast like the Sonics and the Trogs. It's really all those bands that Little Steven plays. So I'm not going to dive into that stuff because he goes pretty deep into that already. So I think people have a pretty good knowledge of that. The other place that a lot of punk rock guys talk about is Detroit. So you think about Iggy and the Stooges, the MC5, Alice Cooper, the original Alice Cooper band. They all came out of Detroit. There was a whole host of bands out of Detroit that had that sound that was real aggressive and really changed the landscape of the psychedelic time period where everything was all lovey. They weren't so lovey. So it was outside the status quo at the time. The other place is obviously New York. And you had, the New York Dolls and Lou Reed, Velvet Underground. And then, if you go across the pond, you had bands you had a whole scene called glam rock in England. And you had your David Bowies, your T-Rex, Slade, Sweet, Roxy Music. All that stuff, even though it was more visually based in the whole glam scene and bright and sparkly and lots of makeup, the music was very much a precursor to punk rock. And I think at some point we're probably going to want to dive into glam rock from England as well because it's such a cool, kind of like Nawabum, there's just so many bands that never made it.
We need a good ballroom blitz.
Exactly. And the other thing is space rock. So our good friend Lemmy was in a band called Hawkwind before he was in Motorhead.
Yes.
And Hawkwind and the Pink Fairies, and there were a bunch of other of these space rock groups that were just out there, blitzed out of their minds and making this amazingly crazy music. So that was another place that was, again, left of center and kind of an influence on what would become punk. And then you also cannot forget the British invasion. So maybe not the Beatles, maybe not the Stones, but I think definitely the Who and the Kinks definitely influenced punk because those were the two bands that were a little heavier, a little grittier, not as mainstream, say, as the other two.
Less blues-based. A lot of the English bands coming over at the time were just rehashing old blues songs. Right. Not rehashing, interpreting in their way blues songs.
The English interpretation of American blues. Exactly, yeah. And those bands were still doing it, but they were doing it a little more aggressively than any blues artist would have ever done it. So you might even say they were doing it poorly, which is what made it sound cool. So... And then if you think about, okay, well, how do we get from this proto-punk, not proto-metal? We've already done that episode. We're doing proto-punk, sorry. How did you go from that kind of proto-punk into the actual punk rock movement? It really began with New York, I would say, New York and London. So it's really centered around those two towns. New York in 74, there was a club called CBGB's.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, most people know what that is, in Lower Manhattan. And there was another club called Max's Kansas City, and those two clubs featured a lot of the acts that would go on to become what we know today as punk rock. And the Ramones, who really, to me, there was no punk rock until the Ramones released their first album or their first single. To me, the Ramones are punk. And they played their first show at CB's in 1974. And they were on the same bill, which this was interesting. They're on the same bill as an act called Angel and Snake. They would rename themselves Blondie.
Oh, much better.
Yeah.
Much better.
So 1974. I had no idea that Blondie was around in 74. That's kind of cool.
I've seen some documentaries about that era, the punk era, when the Sex Pistols came over. And it's some wild times there.
Yeah, and so in 1974, the Ramones started playing in August. And by the end of 1974, they had actually performed 74 shows. Every single show
3 a night
was under 17 minutes long.
Seriously? That'd be kind of nice. I mean, it's a lot of fun to play, but sometimes you're ready to just hit the after party.
Yeah, so they set the pace. And then also in 1974, the magazine called Punk came out. And that is really where the term really caught fire.
Okay.
Because it was a magazine based out of New York, and it was featuring bands like the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, Stooges, New York Dolls. And there was also a band from New York called the Dictators, which I almost played them today, but we're not going to play the Dictators, but maybe some other time. And, of course, the Ramones. And they really focused on that whole CBGB's Max's Kansas City scene. Then if you go over to the other side of the pond, to London, Malcolm McLaren had managed the New York Dolls. He moves back over to London, and he decides to take that whole mindset of what the Dolls were doing and start managing bands in London and kind of steering them towards this scene or this movement.
Showing them how to put on makeup and Aquanet.
Showing them how to dress, everything. He opened a clothing shop, and in the clothing shop he auditioned a singer named Johnny Rotten, and that's where the Sex Pistols first got going. And the Sex Pistols, their first name was called Strand, and they changed it to the Sex Pistols after Johnny came on board. And they played their first gig in late 1975. So all leading up to kind of year zero, which is 76. And so if you look at the timeline, I thought this was really cool. So in April of 76, it moves really fast. April of 76, Blitzkrieg Bopka's released as the first single from the Ramones. The first Ramones album comes out on Sire. In July of 76, the Ramones go to London. And a whole bunch of people in London see them and go, now we get it, right? So in that same month that the Ramones play London, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and the Damned all played their first shows opening for each other. So, and a lot of them saw those Ramones gigs, and they got inspiration. And then they already had started their bands, and they started, formatting their songs in similar fashion and really playing on that scene. By October of 76, the very first English punk single comes out, which is New Rose by the Damned. Ramones come out first, then the Damned come out with their first single. A month later, Anarchy in the UK comes out from Sex Pistols. It moved that fast.
Yeah.
And from there you have the thought of year zero. There was no music before this music. There's nothing more important than punk. And it was the whole idealism, the whole anti-establishment. A lot of it was show, now that we know. But at the time, they all took it very seriously. So you had these young, loud, snotty English kids and American kids saying there was nothing before this movement, and this movement still exists today. So that's where punk rock came from, and that's how quickly it came to be. I thought that was really cool. So I want to jump into some of the bands that influenced it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to play bands from 1972 through 1978-79. So we're going to cover ProtoPunk, and then by the time we get to 76, then we're in what they call the first wave of punk rock. And the second wave of punk rock really went from, say, 79 through 81 or 82. So we're just going to go from ProtoPunk to First Wave.
Got it.
So the first band I'm going to play is from 1972. It's a band called The Modern Lovers. And they're a band from Boston. And they were formed in 1970. And they had two members who attended Harvard. From Boston, makes sense, I guess.
Sure.
Smart guys in a punk rock band. So what happened with them is they go to L.A. in 1972 to cut demos. And they get John Cale, who was in the Velvet Underground, they get him to produce them. And they support the New York Dolls while they're out in L.A. And they get signed to Warner, but because they were out in L.A., they started getting into the hippie scene. It's 1972, so the hippie thing's still going on.
Oh, it's still going strong, yeah.
And they start to change their sound. And they start to get in an argument with their management and with the record company because they had signed a band that was kind of a loud, raucous New York Dolls kind of band, and they started mellowing out and wanting to do this more hippy-dippy stuff. And so they basically just dissolved the whole thing. So they basically stopped the band, they broke up, and the album was never released. It actually got released in 76, and afterwards they reformed, but they never came back to the same style.
Right.
And what they released were the demos that they did with John Cale. So it's an interesting story that
somebody had him sitting on the shelf and decided, oh, wait a minute, there's some money sitting on the shelf right there.
Well, and now, this album's considered so influential to punk rock, and they had basically abandoned it, which is kind of amazing. So I'm going to play The Modern Lovers. This is a song called She Cracked from The Modern Lovers. 1972 is when it was recorded. Didn't come out till 76, but we're going to consider this 72.
Sensitive, she understood me. She understood the European things from 1943. But she does all these things that I can't stand. I get jealous. She stays with another man. She cracked. I'm sad, but I won't. Oh, she cracked. I'm hurt. You're right. She cried, I won. She did these things that I thought she'd self-destroy, necessary to our self-enjoy. I self-develop, necessary to our self-help. She cried, I'm sad, but I won't. Cried, I'm hurt, alright. Oh, well, she cried, she did this that I thought she'd eat garbage, eat shit, get stoned. I stay alone, eat health food at home. She cried, I'm sad, but I won't. Oh, she cracked, I'm hurt. You're right, all right.
Oh, it's over. Oh, sorry. I was still having the rest
That's
of my
a
beer.
long song.
That was the long one.
That was a jam compared to some of these.
2 minutes and 52 seconds. That's really cool to think about. That's from 1972.
Exactly.
Considering what else was going on in music. I mean, Morrison and Hendrix were gone, and recently before that, but still you had the Jefferson Airplanes, and songs were getting really big, and lots of psychedelics were still floating around, and have that come in there, I could see where that would be looked at kind of with a side eye going, what?
Yeah, it would be kind of jarring, I would think, unless you were in Detroit or some, in one of those scenes.
Yeah, in one of the scenes. But I could see that. I don't know if any of these bands had heard of it, but 10 years ago, the Strokes, Stripes, Highs, Vines, things, the minimalist revival that I liked, that's right along the same alley there. It's real minimalist, had a kind of a groove going through the entire song, and real simple melodies on the vocals.
Little droney. Kind of monotone vocals. I mean, nobody was really doing that at that time, and you can see why. Maybe they were just a little early.
Yeah, just a tad, but I liked it.
But you can also really see how they influenced what was to come. So next I want to go over to England. And there was a band called the Hollywood Brats. And they were considered, because this was the time, 1973, this was the time that glam was really coming on the scene. And they dressed very glam, but they had more to do with the New York Dolls, that sort of gritty New York style glam, than they did with the English glam. They were considered the British New York Dolls. And so they're kind of considered glam, they're kind of considered proto-punk. But this is another interesting story of a band that was ahead of their time, and because of that, they didn't get to see their album released while they were still together. Yet now they're heralded as a proto-punk band. And at the time, when they were playing live, they were championed by Keith Moon. He saw them live and went, "This is what's coming." So Keith Moon knew what was up. And they record an album in 73. For whatever reason, I couldn't find exactly why, but the record company refused to release it for whatever reason in 1973. And then the band breaks up. And in 1975, another label bought the masters and released it. And the band wasn't around to support it, so it didn't really go anywhere, but at least it got released. Then years later, after the first wave of punk bands started actually admitting that they liked other music, the Clash and the Sex Pistols both said, yeah, we used to really be into the Hollywood Brats. Mm-hmm. So here's another unfortunate incident and we're going to have several of these today.
Yeah.
Where these proto-punk bands, they were just too ahead of the curve.
I can't imagine how much heart and soul and work goes into recording an album only to have it sit on a shelf and somebody else arbitrarily decides that, nobody's going to hear this. And you have no control over that.
I don't think that would ever, obviously it wouldn't happen today because everybody just self-releases everything, but I don't even think it would have happened. It was very unique to the 60s and 70s. I think once the 80s came around, it was a whole different scene. That wouldn't happen.
Yeah, they give them the demos and say, take a hike. You can self-release it then.
Well, and maybe it was because of the whole punk movement, because if you think about what punk established, they really established that whole, if somebody's not going to do it for me, I'm going to do it myself. The whole DIY ethos, whole mindset, all came from punk rock.
But that music was so ahead of its time and so different. Maybe the record companies didn't want that associated with their name. It's so different they didn't want to drag down. Yeah,
it was a risk, and they didn't want to take the risk, and they should have, because maybe
they missed it.
Yeah, maybe they missed it, or maybe it was truly ahead of the time, so they just couldn't do it. But for whatever reason, it didn't, and so at least we get to hear the Hollywood Brats now. So from 1973, this is Chez, Maximes.
She was sweet 16 when she walked out the door. Hit the road, saw the world, saw the ups and the downs. She went around and around and around and around. Carried on until I read her Uncle Uncle's where she was rich. So rich, yeah. A little massive millionaire who said he was 21. Invested all her money into having fun. Bought a
least that was some good recording quality for an early punk rock song, which not a lot of them had.
True.
But that was a good pick because it was the next step in the evolution towards what we all know as punk rock music. The vocals, the singer had a little bit more of that punk rock sound of what you would typically think of a punk rock singer. The guitars were a little bit heavier. Even the lyrics, we don't care what you say, we don't care what you do. The kind of that attitude. So
very Pistols.
Very Pistols, yeah. And so that's interesting to see that next step in that evolution.
I agree. I think they totally laid out the blueprint for the English bands especially. We've talked about this next band before, but I love this story so much we're going to do it again because this band could have been the first punk band in America. And we talked about them on the Proto Metal episode that we did, but they're truly a proto-punk band. I just, I really love this band. We're talking about the band Death.
Yes.
And if they had released this album in 1975, which was their intent, I think they would have been the first punk rock band because they were ahead of the Ramones. And the story here again, for those who haven't listened to the other episode, I'll do a shortened version because I did a longer version before.
Cliff Notes.
So Death was a band from Detroit that was formed in 1971 by 3 African-American brothers, and they were inspired by The Who. So they were a soul and funk band. And then they were inspired when they saw The Who to change from playing that style of music to playing rock. And in 1975, they were able to get a local Detroit studio to record their demo. And they basically invented punk rock. What they were playing was very much so punk. And they were being shopped by different folks, one of them being Clive Davis, who was, just a mogul in the record industry. And he said, if you change your name from Death to something else, I will put out this record. And that would have probably secured them, a few albums and probably would have started a movement and they would have been a huge name. But because the name Death meant so much to one of the brothers, they said, no, we're not changing our name. We'll take our master tapes. Thank you. And that's what they did. And they instead self-released a single, 2 songs, 500 copies in 1975. And then they kind of faded into obscurity. And then years later, go to 2008, one of the bass player, or the bass player from the band, his son was at a party. And in this party, they were playing obscure cuts and things that people had found in in record stores. I can't speak tonight for some reason. In record stores. And one of the songs that came on that he heard, he said, that sounds like my dad. Because his dad and his uncles had continued playing music, but they had gone to like reggae and being like house music for weddings and things like that. They had dropped their whole rock thing, and he never even knew that they played rock. He said, that sounds just like my dad. And then when he approached his dad about it, he said, oh yeah, that was us. We had a band called Death. It didn't work out. And he showed his son where the master tapes were, in the attic. They'd been sitting in the attic since 1975. In 2009, the son was able to get them released on Drag City Records, and their album came out in 2009. Also in 2013, a really, really good documentary called A Band Called Death came out, and you can get the whole story. And I'm giving a very shortened version of it because we have talked about this before. But I think it's such a good story, but it's also a band that to me really embodied what punk became. And nobody really ever knew this band until, 2008, 2009. It's incredible. So let's play some Death.
It's a story worth telling again.
The album's called For the Whole World to See. This is a song called Freakin' Out.
It's a scheme, there's a theme. Why is my head spinning round in a dream? It's that time, the place. Why all these lights popping up in my face? Or am I freaking out, 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 freaking out? There's a sign on the wall. of the senses as we go through the park? Or am I freaking out, 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 freaking out? Everyone looks very strange today. All of their faces seem to be washed away. Everyone's talking, I can't hear a thing. I'm on the moon, why is the sky so green? I think I'm walking up the stairs while I'm sitting right down in my chair. I feel so light, but I'm not. Everything is turning over the top. Or am I freaking out, 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 freaking out? Oh, I'm freaking out. 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 Or am I freaking out, 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 freaking out?
I'd love to be able to ask them what influenced that. I know the Who got them to change from the soul funk type thing to rock, but that's a very broad term. So, what did he see? What vision did he have, or they have, whoever idea that was, to go in that direction right there?
Well, they are from Detroit, so they might have been pulling from some of that MC5, Iggy, some of that stuff.
Okay,
that was
so
going on.
they were around, or that was out late enough where they could have heard some of the other stuff.
Yeah, they would have heard that. I don't know that. I never heard them mention in the documentary any of that kind of stuff. They really just only mentioned the Who. That was the only band they name dropped. But they were coming from a whole different place on the other side of town, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Than where all this other stuff was going on. But very original. Again, I think if that would have come out in 1975, it would have been a whole different story.
Mm-hmm.
So next, we're going to move into year zero, 1976. And one of the places that actually had a scene as well, I mentioned New York and London. Well, there was actually something going on in Australia too. And there were two main bands from Australia that we think of today. Back in the day, this other band I'm going to play called Radio Birdman, they may not have been thought of as much as a band called The Saints. But I'm going to play some Radio Birdman because they have a pretty interesting story as well. They are a Sydney band from 1974 is when they were formed. And they were huge, huge fans of the Detroit sound. So they had heard the Stooges, they had heard the MC5, and they were kind of putting their own flavor on that. And they recorded a low-budget EP in 1976. And they split up in 1978. Like in and out, and
just like the songs.
Again, it was a very low budget EP. Years later, they would be regarded as one of the founders of punk in 1976. But at the time, really, really not. The Saints were kind of the only band that was really being regarded. But later on, people heard this and they noticed how great the Radio Birdman was, and they actually reunited in the mid '90s. When punk rock was kind of having another resurgence. And they kept going from the mid-'90s on. So it's kind of interesting. We had talked about that with Nawabum, how these bands were around for a couple of years, put out something great, but it wasn't discovered until later, and then that allowed them to become a band later in life.
And reform.
And keep going. And that's exactly what happened with Radio Birdman as well. So here is Burn My Eye, 1976 Radio Birdman.
Chem breath rolling upside my head. 88 spitting out burning lead. Had to get myself out of town. Don't want to see skulls flying around. Well, burn my eye. Yeah, burn my mind. I couldn't believe it. I ain't lying, no. Yeah. Come on. Punch a shit, call man, take a scoop.
can't get more than like 2 drinks in those songs.
Yeah, that's the shortest song I think we're going to play today. 1:36,
Like
in and out. Their first single, "Burn My Eye."
I like it.
I love it too. I when I hear that, I think I can hear that they're different than the London scene. They're different than New York. You can almost hear they're a lot happier.
Yeah.
Because they're in
the
Sydney.
angry punk. Yeah.
They're in Sydney, and they're probably all surfers. They're probably basking in the sunshine.
Way before the country caught on fire.
Yeah, exactly. But not in dreary London
Or Detroit.
Not in dirty Detroit or dirty New York.
And there's something about the proto-punk here that it's before it got so over the top anarchist that the musicality of the music started to just was all a jumbled mess, and that was by intent, by design. But me personally, the earlier proto-punk got just enough melody and guitar leads that it's a lot more fun for me.
Yeah, and that particular song, for one, the bass playing was amazing. I love the bass guitarist. I don't know his name, but whoever played that bass, good on you. And then they had kind of that old school 50s kind of throwback to that old school 50s rock and roll, which I love when bands can incorporate that but make it sound modern. And they did that in that song. So speaking of what you were saying with that really rough, what was to come to be known as hardcore, that is when I got into music. It was really, I came in as I've mentioned it, a little skate punk, and what was happening at that time was hardcore, which is kind of considered the third wave of punk. All of that music came from California, most of it.
That was the epicenter.
That was kind of the epicenter of it. It was, Orange County, punk rock, hardcore. That's what really I based all of my knowledge of punk rock on from an early age. So kind of going back and hearing this stuff, when I was younger, I thought, that's not very punk, because I thought of punk as really obnoxiously hardcore. But this stuff does have more melody to it. It has a little more musicality to it than what hardcore did. But one of the things that I did find is I thought that all of this proto-punk and all of this first wave was really based around London and New York. But there actually was a California band from San Francisco in 1976, a band called Crime. And they were kind of the first of the California punk bands. And they would actually influence all of those bands in the second wave, like X, and there's just a whole host of them that were all pretty much LA based and San Francisco based. And they would really influence, along with this other first wave stuff from these other cities, they would influence what would become known as hardcore. So I thought it was cool that I could find this. And this is from a 7-inch single that Crime put out in 1976. And it was all DIY, self-release. They only ever released 3 7-inch singles, and this was the first one that I'm going to play. But again, they go on to influence the Go-Go's and Fear and the Weirdos and the Germs. These are all California bands who are known as second wave. But they disbanded in 1980, so here again.
In and out.
In and out. So here's Crime with Baby You're So Repulsive.
It's a love song.
From Hot Wire My Heart, 7-inch single, 1976.
Bad girl
See, it was a love song.
You're so repulsive.
I think I'll stick around. That's what he said.
So I think that's more of what people came to think punk was.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously crosses that edginess line where you've got the full on, it just makes you feel a little uncomfortable if you're not used to that type of music. Like, what
Jarring.
is this? A little jarring. The singer sounded like, what's the guy's name from the Dolls? The singer, drawing a complete blank here.
Buster Poindexter.
Jeez. How did I forget that guy? But yeah, he had that sound too.
David Johansen.
Oh, okay.
But he
yeah,
became Buster Poindexter.
I will always know him as Buster Poindexter, yeah, because I'm a child of the 80s.
So I think that was really the blueprint for not even second wave. That was more almost going to straight to hardcore. But that was 1976 when that came out, the same year that the Ramones and Pistols came out.
Future hardcore.
Interesting.
Right there.
I'm going to move into 1977. So we've had the Clash, we've had the Pistols, we've had the Damned, and the Ramones are all out. So the big ones that everybody knows. And the Ramones actually influenced a band from Cleveland, Ohio, to relocate to New York, and the band is called the Dead Boys. And one of the things that punk rock also established were these great fake names for the artist, and the Dead Boys had some of the best. So you had Stiv Bators, you had Cheetah Chrome, Jimmy Zero, Jeff Magnum, and Johnny Blitz. They are the Dead Boys.
That was a porn. I've seen. No, I haven't seen that.
But great names. And Stiv Bators.
Stiv. Okay.
Stiv Bators. Yeah, he died in 1990s, but he was in this band, the Dead Boys, and he was in another band that was more of a goth band called Lords of the New Church. But a lot of people know Stiv Bators, and a lot of people know the song I'm about to play. This is probably the most famous song that I'll be playing today. It may not be meant for in obscuria, but
it's on obscuria.
But we're going to play it anyway because it just needs to be on this in this discussion. So again, they were signed to the same label as the Ramones, and they released their debut in 1977, so a year after the Ramones. And one of the things I thought was interesting is in 1978, their drummer was stabbed in the chest 17 times in some kind of scuffle after a gig.
I don't mean to laugh at somebody getting stabbed, but it just...
Well, he lived.
Oh, okay, good. Bless his heart.
But they held a benefit show to help pay for his medical bills, and guess who played the drums? John Belushi.
What?
Yeah. How cool is that? John Belushi played the drums.
Yeah, I've seen performing. I forgot he played drums.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of cool.
Wow.
The song I'm going to play has been covered by a ton of bands, and that's the reason I'm going to play it, is because it shows how influential punk rock has been since it came out on so many different styles of music since. This song has been covered by Pearl Jam, it's been covered by Overkill, a thrash band, and it's been covered by Guns N' Roses and a host of other bands. And the song's called Sonic Reducer. And the band actually broke up in 79, so they released this in 77, and they're out by 79. And then Stiv went on again to be in Lords of the New Church. He died in 1990. This is from their album in 1977 called Young, Loud, and Snotty, the best punk rock album title I've ever heard. This is Sonic Reducer.
From my room, they are just passing by, but I'm not come to doom. Things will be different there. The sun will rise from here. Then I'll be 10 feet tall, and you'll be nothing at all. Yeah, I got my down machine, I got my electronic grave. Sonic producer, ain't no loser. I'm a sonic producer, I ain't no loser. I say I'm a sonic producer, sonic producer. Yeah, I'm a sonic producer, sonic producer, sonic producer.
That's a cool drum break in the middle of that. That was
Yeah.
unexpected.
Very different from any other punk song
Yeah.
I can think of. And they used kind of that phaser or whatever that sound was, which was kind of a thing that, if I think back to Alive on the Peter Criss solo,
Oh.
that was a Kiss thing.
Oh, yeah?
And then actually Rush did it on All the World's a Stage with Neil Peart's drum solo. They did the whole thing, putting the phased effect on his drums. So it's kind of interesting in 1977 that they were pulling from that as well. So interesting.
That's quite the pedigree.
But anyway, that was, again, that was a fairly decent, well-known punk song, but I felt like we should play it.
I don't think I've ever heard it.
Okay, well, good. So we've mentioned the New York Dolls a lot, and they had a major impact on a lot of these bands. They were very much so a proto-punk band. But after the Dolls broke up, Johnny Thunders, the guitarist, he continued on, and he put together a band called the Heartbreakers. So at the same time that Tom Petty had his band and the Heartbreakers, Johnny Thunders also had the Heartbreakers, which is kind of interesting. So this is Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers. They formed in 1975. It was Johnny and Jerry Nolan, both from the New York Dolls, so the drummer and the guitarist. And they were actually the support band for the Sex Pistols on their Anarchy tour. So the only tour that the Pistols ever did, Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers were the opening band. And they broke up. They ended up breaking up in 1979. They recorded one album called LAMF, and apparently they hated the mix. They felt like the album failed them, something about the mastering or the mix or something, that it was horrible. In later years, the version that I got is called The Lost Mixes, so it sounds a lot better. But apparently they hated the album so much that they felt like that was the reason that they never went anywhere. They were notorious drug users, so I think heroin had as much to play with why they never went anywhere. Johnny died in 1991. Jerry Nolan died in 1992. So we'll never hear from this band again, but at least we have this version of the Lost Mixes which came out, and I'm going to play a song called One Track Mind.
I fixed up the track and I don't look back. I got one
If you listen to that song really closely, just really dive deep into it, you learn he has a one-track mind.
Nice. Good pull. I'm
Somewhere
glad you
there.
listened to that.
Yeah, it was deep. It was deep.
It was very deep. So the original bass player for Johnny and the Heartbreakers was a guy named Richard Hell. And he was in a band before that called Television, and they were one of the proto-punk, first-wave punk bands. He left Television to join Johnny and the Heartbreakers, and then didn't last but a few months, to my understanding. And then he goes out on his own, and he puts together a band called Richard Hell and the Voidoids. And I'm going to play a song from their album that came out the same year as Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, 1977. And Richard Hell is known as the guy that invented the punk rock look. So Malcolm McLaren, when he was in New York with the Dolls, he saw Richard Hell in Television. And Richard Hell was already doing the safety pins, the combat boots, the ripped clothes, the spiky hair. He stole that whole look from Richard Hell and gave it to the Sex Pistols in London.
Interesting.
The painted art on, painted
chest,
letters
yeah,
on shirts and jackets and stuff, that was all Richard Hell. So he's kind of known as the inventor of the look. Richard Hell and the Voidoids, they disbanded in 82. They were around from 77 to 82. They put out a really good album called Blank Generation, and the song Blank Generation is kind of known as one of the top punk songs of the time. But still, you've probably never heard of them, right? It's still a band that most people don't know who they are. So I want to play Blank Generation by Richard Hell and the Voidoids. They're also known as art punk because they were kind of that New York scene it was punk, but you couldn't really classify it as punk.
Almost performance art.
Almost, yeah, because you had Patti Smith, you had Television, you had Talking Heads. They were all considered part of that New York punk movement, but I would never call them punk. And Richard Hell's kind of in that same category, but I do want to play this. Blank Generation, 1977.
Such a gamble when you get a face. It's fascinating to observe what the mirror does, but when I dine it's for the wall that I've set a place. I belong to the blank generation and I can take it or leave it each time. Well, I belong to the generation, but I can take it or leave it each time. Falling at the window as the doctor cursed. He was a cartoon long forsaken by the public eye. The nurse suggested her daughter that I breathe my first. The doctor grabbed my throat and yelled, God's consolation prize. I belong to the blank generation and I can take it or leave it each time. Well, I belong to the generation, but I can take it or leave it each time. Take it. And drop it in the vacant lot. To lose my train of thought and fall into your arms tracks and watch beneath my eyelids every passing dot. I belong to the blank generation and I can take it or leave it each time. Well, I belong to the generation, but I can take it or leave it each time. I belong to the blank generation and I can take it or leave it each time. Well, I belong to the generation, but I can take it or leave it each time.
Was that Neil Young on the guitar lead?
Kind of sounded like it, didn't it?
Very much so.
Jagged, kind of stabbing and slashing it.
Yeah, stabbing in my eye, my ear, it just stabbed me all over.
It's cool though. It's very different. And that song's well known as one of the primary punk songs from
kind
the
of
time.
Iggy Popish too, with the
Very much so. You
I
can
just
tell
heard
where they're coming
Passenger
from.
on the radio today, and that reminded me of it. Kind of the grooving bass line, the walking bass line. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly. And moving into kind of the end of the first wave, we'll go into 1978. And two of the bands that we've been talking about that were ProtoPunk that really influenced the whole scene, MC5 and the Stooges. Well, you know that Iggy went on to be Iggy Pop without the Stooges and did the whole thing with David Bowie. But where did the rest of the guys go? Well, Ron Ashton went to a band called Destroy All Monsters. And this was a band that existed in Detroit since 1973, but in 77, Ron Ashton from the Stooges and Mike Davis from the NC5 joined this band. And they end up really establishing a bigger sound. They kind of took the whole Detroit sound and really made it bigger for this band. They were known for modifying their instruments. They would do drum box, tape loops, hot-wired toys as sounds, cheap keyboards. They made a lot of noise. And getting in Ron Ashton and Mike Davis kind of accompanied what they were doing and just made it bigger. They released an album in 78 called Bored, and they actually ended up playing with the Ramones and the Dead Boys at that time. So it was kind of cool that, you know, the bands that influenced the Ramones and influenced the Dead Boys and all of the English bands actually continued, and they were able to play in other bands and actually play with these bands that they influenced. I think that's really cool. Now, they ended up breaking up in 84, but they were resurrected by Sonic Youth. Thurston Moore put out a whole bunch of their recordings in the 90s, and they had this whole resurgence. You know, so here's a band that, you know, had a short run, and then they were resurrected later on and continued on. So I'm going to play something from Destroy All Monsters. This is You're Gonna Die from Bored.
And a witch flew by, whipping her brooms, and she said, "You're gonna die, 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 die." Walking down the street, starting to cry, saw another boy. He said, "You're gonna die, honey. You're gonna die, honey. You're gonna die." So I went to my mother 'cause she doesn't lie. Took a look at me and said, "You're gonna die, no, you're gonna die, no, you're gonna die." 'Cause you're much too young to live any older. You got the mark of death, that's why you're gonna die, gonna die, gonna die, gonna and a witch flew by, whipping her brooms, and she said, "You're gonna die, 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 die." Walking down the street, starting to cry, saw another boy. He said, "You're gonna die, honey. You're gonna die, honey. You're gonna die." So I went to my mother 'cause she doesn't lie. Took a look at me and said, "You're gonna die, no, you're gonna die, no, you're gonna die." 'Cause you're much too young to live any older. You got the mark of death, that's why you're gonna die, gonna die, gonna die, 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 die.
It was a big hit on mainstream radio, I believe.
Yes. You think they had any influence on Sonic Youth? I don't know. It's a stretch to think that.
Yeah, I wonder why Thurston Moore released all their stuff.
It makes total sense now.
Yeah.
I liked it.
1978. Yeah. I mean, that was trippy in 1978.
Absolutely. And there were a number of instruments, like you said, that I can't identify. It sounded really cool, though.
Yeah, they put a lot of loops and delay and all sorts of stuff on.
No, that's
nobody else was doing that. There's another band called Suicide that were kind of doing something similar, but not quite the same. So I'm going to play my last one, and this is a band. So we're going to stay in the year 1978, and this is a band that really would be considered part of the second wave. But this song came out in 78, so I consider this a bridge to the second wave of punk. And this is a band from L.A., and we know that a lot of the second wave bands were based out of L.A. And this is a band called the Alley Cats. And I found them, there's a great documentary that came out in 1981 called A Music War. And I only discovered it probably 6 or 7 years ago. And it's got the Police in it. It's got all these bands from 81 and maybe 79, 80, 81 that were kind of the up-and-coming new wave punk. It's kind of all over the board, but the Alley Cats are featured, I think, twice on it, and they're playing the Whiskey. And their performance I saw it and I went, who is this band I've never heard of? They're amazing. It's just a 3-piece band. They have this really tiny girl that plays bass, and she is so badass. And I was like, whoa, who is this band? It's the Alley Cats. And they were kind of part of that whole LA scene. They played Club 88, the Hong Kong Cafe, the Mask, the Whiskey. These are all venues that would become known for that second wave of punk. The bands like X and this band, the Alley Cats, and a whole host of others that would also then go on to influence hardcore. But they really ushered in the second wave, and they got this single out by themselves. And I got kind of really into this band a few years ago, and I tried to scoop up everything I could find on them. There's not a lot, but as I was going through and trying to find all these albums, I found that they actually changed their name in 1985 to the Zarkons. Weird name. But I guess they figured at the time that they couldn't continue as the Alley Cats because that whole scene had kind of died away by that time. And so I guess they tried to reestablish themselves under a different name, but it's basically the same band. I think they added 1 or 2 more members. Instead of a trio, I think they were a 4 or 5 piece. And they released 2 albums as the Zarkons. So I actually have all of these albums. I have all the Alley Cats albums and the Zarkons. This is Nothing Means Nothing Anymore from their 7-inch single that came out in 1978.
Kind of start off with a little bit of a surf rock edge to it.
Totally. There was a band called Agent Orange that I was really into when I was a skateboarder, and they had that sort of surf sound mixed with punk.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably an influence on them. I think this is... Do I hear a dog in the background?
No, that's Dio.
Awesome. We were playing the Alley Cats, so that's why he's barking.
That's why, yeah, I heard you talking
Makes
about
sense.
cats. Yeah,
Totally makes sense. Well, that's what I had for today. I don't know if we shocked you or if you're into it or what, but
it was a really interesting trip down non-memory lane, and what I mean by that is I'm barely old enough to remember that time period in my life that punk rock was around, but I was in Pensacola, Florida, which was one of the furthest places you can go away from any punk rock scene or movement. And my only connection memory-wise to punk rock at the time was probably 1977 or 78, somewhere in there, maybe 76, I don't know, that I was talking about what I was going to dress up for Halloween, and my older sister said, "Hey, I could dress you up like a punk rocker." And of course I go, "A what?" And I don't remember what
I'm surprised she knew.
Yeah, well, she was probably like early high school, late junior high. I won't say how old she is because she'll find me and kill me. But yeah, she knew enough of what that was. So it must have, in small town, not that small town, but small town Pensacola, Florida, as conservative and backwoods as North Florida was, that it had that much of a reach and influence that early on. And that just describes how meteoric it was and then burned out just as quick in that particular, the first wave at least. But yeah, so I've got pictures of me with spiked hair and, dressing up like a punk rocker, which once again, I had no clue what that was, but it's just interesting.
Please dig that up and post that on Facebook.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I brought that back. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's my version of what my sister dressed me up as. So yeah, and once again, as you're telling all these stories of what was going on and all the scenes and things like that, it's just so funny to the dichotomy between that and my life, which was polar opposite.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, I mean, I'm a little bit younger. I don't remember this at all. I didn't know anything about this. I came into punk rock from hardcore, which again is more of what is to be considered the third wave, so not even the second wave. I knew nothing about any of this. So all of this has been discovery for me over the past 20 or 30 years and digging through all this stuff. And I can see the connection of where it's all coming from. One of the things that I hear a lot from, especially folks who are really into hard rock and metal, is that they don't get punk rock. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this today is because I feel like it's really, I've never seen how they were that far removed.
No, it's not
really not, especially
completely different parts of the brain. It goes together really well.
And if you dig back to where it came from, in our proto-metal episode, I actually played a proto-punk band because these things kind of mix together a little bit. Maybe one's a little more blues-based than the other. Mm-hmm. One's definitely more avant-garde than the other. Maybe one's more musical than the other. But they're really not that different. Mm-hmm. And so people that say, "Oh, I don't like punk," but they're really into metal, I never really get that. I'm like, if you just took a little bit of time and listened to it, I think you'd get that. They're really close.
They probably heard one or two punk rock songs, and they were the wrong ones to listen to first, and that just turned them off. Maybe that was the ones that they should have broadened their horizons and listened to our podcast.
Exactly. Well, and I hope we did just that. So with that, thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Later.
See ya.